funding and competitive funding opportunities from other sponsors of research. We will describe how the Texas Sea Grant request for proposal research priorities for this competition were developed. We will review pre-proposal preparation and submission requirements. We'll go over the life after a pre-proposal submission, and then go over the Sea Grant system, a proposal system for submitting pre-proposals, and overview and instructions and how-to screenshots. And lastly, we'll go through a question and answer session. This webinar is being recorded, and we will make our presentations and the video recording publicly available on our website following the webinar. If you would save your questions for after the presentation, we will leave time for a Q&A. Right now I have the chat box off for everyone so that we can just concentrate. And so when you're at the point of asking a question at the end of the webinar, then you can just really just begin typing, and I'll look as you're entering your questions, and we'll have a good discussion. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Pamela Plotkin. And we'll allow her to share her screen.
Thank you, Mia. Can you see my screen now?
Almost, it's starting. There we go.
Excellent. Well, thank you to all the participants who have joined us today to participate in this webinar about our new RFP for fiscal year 2022 through 2024. In this first part of the presentation, I am going to talk about what kind of research we're looking for, and also give you some examples of some previously funded research that we believe were projects that met the requirements of our RFP, as well as had some terrific publicly relevant outcomes that we are seeking from all of our research proposals. So we hope that this will help you as you're developing your ideas and your pre-proposals for this specific competition. Today's presentation is exactly the same as the presentation we did earlier this week. And so if you attended earlier this week, you're not going to get new information. You're going to get the same information. If you want to sit in on it a second time, that is fine with us, and we welcome you to do so. And we also welcome you to ask questions at the end of our presentations, as Mia already communicated. So without any further ado, I'm going to get started and focus first on what interests you the most, and that is the most important question: what does Texas Sea Grant want to fund? And we try to communicate this in great detail every 2 years, and I hope that after today's presentation you have a better understanding of what we're looking for. And I'm going to go through each of these bullet points in a little more detail in the next 30 to 45 minutes, so you don't have to write madly. You'll see this slide again, and I'll go through each of these points one by one. But what I do want to tell you at this point is that Texas Sea Grant is interested in improving the understanding, wise use, and stewardship of Texas's coastal and marine resources from inland areas connected to watersheds to the deep blue waters of the Gulf of Mexico. And that includes fresh water, that includes rivers, that includes streams. We're not dismissing the fresh water areas that feed into our bays and estuaries. And so I want to emphasize that, and I'll emphasize that again towards the end of this webinar. And if you look in our RFP, it is in the very first sentence that we are interested in supporting research from inland areas connected to watersheds all the way out to the deep blue waters of the Gulf of Mexico. So any research within that space is fair game. So the other thing I want to emphasize is that this is a research competition. We're not primarily funding projects that will restore habitat or pay for infrastructure to reduce flooding in communities. We're supporting research. So please keep that in mind as well as we go along. And then lastly, you know, we are interested in the intellectual merit of your research. Similar to National Science Foundation, we are also interested in the broader impacts of your research, similar to the National Science Foundation. But we define broader impacts in our own way. And so we're going to emphasize for the next 30 to 45 minutes what we mean by broader impacts. And I will try to call that out to you in each of the slides as I go forward. So this is what we want to fund here on this slide. We need your research to be aligned with our strategic plan goals, and we're going to look at those in detail. We need your research to address one of our research priorities, which is listed on page 2 of the request for proposals, and I will show that in a few minutes. We want to support integrated research and extension projects. We want to support outcome-oriented research that spans broad areas, including natural sciences, physical sciences, social, behavioral, and economic sciences, engineering, planning, law, and anything else that, that can help us understand, use wisely, and be better stewards of our Texas coastal and marine resources. We want research that has an end user identified, and this is new. In our current RFP, we've not used that language as much as we are using it this time. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking to you about what we're looking for in terms of an end user. And then finally, if you meet the requirements of the first 5 bullets, we expect that your research will generate substantial impacts in Texas, short-term, medium-term, and hopefully long-term impacts in Texas. So that's what we want to fund. And as I tell folks all the time, this is not a funding opportunity for everybody. This is a funding opportunity that has specific requirements. And so if you do not see your research area represented in the next few slides, please don't try to fit it into the research topics and our research needs, because I think that every year we have some people who do that, and they're very frustrated in the end when their proposals are not selected because their research did not align with our strategic plan goals. So, so I'll talk a little bit more next about our strategic plan. We have a strategic plan that extends from 2018 through 2023. Typically, we have 4-year plans. This time we have a 6-year plan, and we just recently updated it to extend through the end of 2023. And actually, it will extend until January of 2024. So one thing that is really important for you to understand about our organization is that we are federally funded by NOAA. And we, as a federally funded program, have to work with our sponsor, NOAA. Within NOAA, there is a National Sea Grant Office, and the National Sea Grant Office leads all of the state sea grant programs. They develop a strategic plan every 4 years, and their strategic plan has to align with NOAA's strategic plan because they are a federal entity within NOAA. As federally sponsored programs, each of the state sea grant programs have to have a strategic plan that aligns with the National Sea Grant Strategic Plan. However, we're allowed to customize our strategic plans to meet the needs of our states. And so to give you one simple example, in Texas, we have a very strong and robust shrimp fishery. And so you'll see some of the work that we do and some of the research that we fund and some of the language in our strategic plan refers to the Texas shrimp fishery. Well, in Rhode Island, they don't have a shrimp fishery like we do, but they do have a pretty good lobster fishery. And so they have things in their strategic plan that address the needs of their lobster fishery. So that's one example of how states customize their plans to meet the needs of their states. We all have different coasts. We all have different challenges along our coasts, and we are allowed by our National Sea Grant Office to meet the needs of our states, still staying within NOAA's strategic plan and the National Sea Grant Office strategic plan. So many of you are probably academics, part of a department, part of a college, part of a university, and you have been involved in strategic planning, and you develop those strategic plans, and then they magically disappear until somebody pulls them out a few years later and says, hey, what did we do? What did we achieve in our strategic plan? Our strategic plan is not that kind of a strategic plan. Our strategic plan guides all of our spending and guides all of our programming. And we are accountable every year to NOAA to achieve the goals that we lay out in our strategic plan. So this is very important to us because in our evaluation, we have to do well in order to continue to receive money. And so we, every 4 years, develop our strategic plan goals in association with NOAA's National Sea Grant Office and with input from stakeholders such as industry, state agencies, academic entities, public coastal community, and we do that through surveys. And we also get input from our advisory committee and from our staff. And together that forms our strategic plan that we are then held accountable for. So, so this is a different kind of strategic plan than some of you may have been used to developing. This is one that determines how much funding we get in the future. And so it's really important for us to try to achieve our goals, because if we don't, then it can impact our status as a program and the funding we receive as a program. Another thing I want to mention at this point in time is that when you take a look at our budget, our federal funds are primarily split among 3 different categories. One is administration, which receives about 15% of our funds. And then the rest is split between research and our extension program. Most of you are familiar with our research program, less familiar with our extension program. We have a great team of extension professionals that are located in coastal communities from Beaumont down to Brownsville, where they connect with our coastal communities to try to understand what the issues and challenges are in those communities and help them with science-based information to tackle some of those challenges. And I'll talk a little bit more about them. But all of our research, all of our extension addresses the goals in the strategic plan that I'm going to be sharing with you today. Now, I'm not going to share the whole plan with you today, just some pieces of it. We encourage you to go to our website, download the plan, and take a look at specifically the focus areas and the goals in that plan that you're going to have to address in your pre-proposals and in your full proposals. So let's dig a little bit deeper into those strategic plan goals that I've mentioned. We have 4 focus areas, and I've got 2 focus areas on the screen right now. The first one is sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. The second focus area is healthy coastal ecosystems. These are the same focus areas that our National Sea Grant Office strategic plan uses. And so we're perfectly aligned with them here, but our goals are a little bit different and customized to Texas. So if you look under the first focus area, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, we have 2 goals listed here. You'll see them in our plan listed as goal 3 and goal 4. The first one, Texas seafood industries meet public demand through sustainable and profitable operations. So if you go and take a look at that goal, you'll see some more specific information about what kind of applied research we're looking for that will address that goal. Same for goal number 4, which is an informed public demand sustainable and locally sourced seafood in support of Texas industries. So those are our 2 goals under that specific focus area. And those are 2 goals that you can select if your research fits within those goals. The next 2 goals are under the focus area, healthy coastal ecosystems. Goal number 5 and 6 are habitat ecosystems and the services they provide are monitored, enhanced, and/or restored. Goal number 6 is natural resources are sustained to support coastal communities and marine dependent industries, including recreational, commercial fisheries, and tourism. So we're looking for your research to fit within one of our goals. This is also new in this RFP. In the past, we asked you to fit your research within a focus area. Now we're asking you to be more specific and tell us which one of our strategic plan goals is your research going to achieve. And then our last, strategic plan goal focus area is resilient communities and economies. And goals 1 and 2 are listed here. You'll see those in our strategic plan. So we've basically got 6 goals that we're looking to support in this research competition. And if your research does not fit squarely within one of these strategic plan goals, then this RFP is not for you. So please take a look at our strategic plan. Please take a look at the goals. Please take a look at the information contained underneath each one of those goals for more specific information about what kind of research we are looking for within each of those goals. When you look at our strategic plan, you'll see that we actually have 4 focus areas. And the 4th focus area, we're not looking to support at this time, and that is STEM literacy. We believe that many of our research projects do indirectly support STEM literacy, and so we're not looking for anybody to do any direct research on STEM literacy. So only 3 of our 4 focus areas are included in this RFP: resilient communities and economies, sustainable seafood and aquaculture, and healthy coastal ecosystems. So please take a look at our strategic plan and specifically our strategic plan goals, because you're going to need to identify which of the goals your research is aligned with when you submit your pre-proposal. Okay, so moving along, we have research priorities that we have identified in this RFP. And if you take a look at the RFP on page 2, you will see this list of research priorities there at the top of page 2. And Texas Sea Grant is seeking proposals that address the following research priorities: 1 or more of these research priorities. And we've listed them by focus area. So if you look at sustainable fisheries and aquaculture focus area, we're looking for any research that addresses oyster aquaculture. We're looking for any kind of research that addresses recreational fisheries. We're looking for any kind of research that addresses seafood traceability, quality, and safety. And we're looking for any kind of research that addresses techniques to support stock enhancement of wild stocks for recreational and/or commercial fisheries. And then under the healthy coastal ecosystems focus area, you see 3 research priorities there: oyster reef restoration, protection and restoration of coastal wetlands, colonial waterbird rookery island restoration. Now, one thing I want to be real specific about is we're not looking for you to actually go out and do the restoration, though your proposal could do that. We're looking for research that will support oyster reef restoration. We're looking for research that will lead to the protection and restoration of coastal wetlands. We're looking for research that will lead to colonial waterbird rookery island restoration. So I want to be real specific about that. And then in the last focus area, resilient communities and economies, here we've got flood mitigation, social vulnerability, and management interventions to increase resilience of coastal communities to climate change. So again, we're looking for research that will enhance flood mitigation. We're not looking to support the purchase of equipment or infrastructure to actually mitigate floods in coastal communities. We're looking for research that will help mitigate flooding in coastal as well as inland communities. So, again, focus on research, and we'll talk about the potential outcomes for that research in a few minutes. So these are our research priorities. So when you submit your pre-proposal, we're going to ask you what goal or goals from our strategic plan your research proposal addresses, and we're going to ask you which of the research priorities your research proposal addresses. So make sure that your research fits squarely within our goals and our research priorities. Not all research will, and that's okay. This may not be the competition for you. So I want to take a minute and as we move into our discussion about outcomes, I mentioned earlier that Texas Sea Grant, as you know, is a federally funded program, and we use a large portion of our budget to support research, and we use a large portion of our budget to support extension. And this is Texas Sea Grant's model of integrated research and extension. And so Texas Sea Grant likes to support integrated research and extension projects. And we ask that your pre-proposal and full proposal have a plan for how you're going to extend your research. And that can be done in many different ways. This is our model. You don't have to use our model, but it's there for your use should you want to use it. So at the top of this picture on the left-hand side, there's a coastal community, and at the bottom right of your screen, you should see a university. We are the linkage between these two entities. And so what we want to do is we want to identify the challenges that our coastal communities are experiencing, communicate that to the research community, and then have the research community funded by Texas Sea Grant solve those challenges and problems identified by our coastal communities. And then we want to translate the results of your research back to the coastal communities. And so in this figure, there's a two-way flow of information. And if that two-way flow is working well in both directions, then we can solve those challenges of the coastal communities using and harnessing the intellectual capacity of Texas's research universities. And so that's really the aim of this RFP, is to help match researchers with community needs. So our extension team on the right-hand side would love to work with you. They're trained professionals. They know how to help research projects and researchers develop extension programs, and they are available to you as people who can work alongside you should you wish to do so. Now, there are some of you who are at universities that have your own folks who do this kind of work, and so we like to give you the flexibility to use your own people should you wish to do so. You do not have to use our people, our extension professionals in your projects, but we do advise you to use them should you wish to do so. So that's part of the equation of this competition. Is we want integrated research and extension projects so that the research results are delivered back to our coastal communities. Now, I want to spend some time talking about outcome-oriented research, because if you look at our RFP, we talk about supporting outcome-oriented research that spans broad areas of natural, physical, social, behavioral, and economic sciences, engineering, policy, planning, and law. And this is what we want to support. So this is a very long list, and some of these things you may be used to doing as part of your research grants regularly. So if you look at the top left, most faculty are interested and regularly write peer-reviewed publications, and that's something that is kind of a standard expectation for most research grants. Most of you train undergraduate students and graduate students in your research programs, and so that's something that you usually do. The other outcomes are things that most of you don't usually aim for. Some of you do, but most of you don't. And so things like doing research that impacts policy and or decision making is not typically a priority for most faculty, but it is a priority for this competition, having outcomes such as these that we have listed here. So we want to see your research have an impact on the coastal communities through managing resources. We want to see your research have an impact on ecosystems and habitats protected, enhanced, or restored. We want to see your research create or retain jobs and businesses. We want to see your research potentially develop curriculum for PK through 12 students in informal or formal educational settings. And every year, this is one of those things that we discuss in great detail, because this is our broader impacts. This is what we like to see resulting from the research that we support. And these are the things that we're evaluated on at Texas Sea Grant. So our extension team, they're all working on these things. They're all generating outcomes such as the ones you see on the screen. And we need our funded investigators to work on these as well through the research that we support. And there's no requirement to pick a certain number of outcomes. There's no requirement to pick, some from the left-hand side of the screen, some from the right-hand side of the screen. There's no priority outcomes that we're looking for. It's all going to be dependent on the type of research that you do. So some research will lend itself to impacting policy and decision making. Other types of research will lend themselves to engaging volunteers or citizen scientists in the research. And yet other types of research will have impact on community resiliency. And I'll give you some examples of these types of research projects we have funded in the past that have generated some of the outcomes that you see here. So, so we need broader impacts. We need to see some of the outcomes that we have displayed on on this screen. So keep that in mind as you're developing your research project. And again, if your research does not fit within our goals, if your research does not fit within our research priorities, and if your research will not generate outcome-oriented research such as, or outcomes such as the ones listed here, then this is probably not the RFP for you. Okay, so Texas Sea Grant is also interested in supporting research with identified end users. This is something that has been in our RFP in previous years, but we haven't emphasized it enough. And so this year we're trying to emphasize it more because we want you to tell us at the pre-proposal stage who needs your data, who needs your research results. And here I've got examples of some of the end users and the type of research that, that these end users might need. So in that first bullet point here, you see a local community. We could pick any local community. And, let's just say Rockport, Texas. Let's say you're interested in working in Rockport, Texas, and you're interested in doing some research that aligns with flood mitigation research priority and within our focus area of resilient communities and economies. Well, if your research is going to help the city of Rockport in developing their resilience plan, and they have one, and it's going to address part of that plan, then that is a great example of an end user who will benefit from your research on flood mitigation. And so you could work with a local community. You could also work with a state agency. And here I've given an example of research that might inform a specific management decision. So you might want to partner with someone like Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and maybe your research will enhance the nutrition of some fish that they are restocking in the wild. And that will help them reduce their costs or grow fish quicker. But it may have an impact on not just the resource, but also the state agency's management of that resource. That's an example of an end user. The public can also be an end user. And so research that will result in improvements to public health and safety is one example that I will share with you in a few minutes of an actual project that we supported that did enhance public health and safety. A non-governmental organization, a group like the Galveston Bay Foundation, may benefit from research that you do that will improve methods for restoring coastal wetlands or restoring wild oyster reefs. And Galveston Bay Foundation is in the business of restoring coastal wetlands and restoring oyster reefs. And so maybe your research will benefit the work that they are doing in that restoration, and you could partner with them and they could be one of your end users. And then lastly, industry is a great end user. We've got a lot of industry that is marine dependent industry, from fishing industry to the tourism industry. And one example I've given you here is someone who does research that might improve fisheries catch or yield. And so there are lots of different kinds of end users. We want you to identify who those groups are. We want you to have letters of support from those groups in your full proposals. You can identify those end users in your pre-proposals, but we want to see letters of support in your full proposals, and we want you to tell us how they are, why they need the research that you're going to do, and how they're going to benefit from the research that you're going to do. So this is a new thing that we are trying to overemphasize this year, because we want you to have a plan for how your research results are going to get to the end users. It's not okay to publish your research in a journal and then let people just find your research at some time that's convenient to them. We want you to take your research. We want it to be used. We want to support actionable research. And I'll talk a little bit more about actionable research in a few minutes. So moving along, I'm going to give you 3 examples now of some previously funded research that meets a lot of the requirements that I've already talked about, though they were funded in previous RFP that may have had different research priorities listed in the RFP. So they may not align perfectly with our current RFP research priorities. So the first one is a great example of how the public was the end user of the research, in addition to the Galveston Island Park Board, the Galveston Island Beach Patrol, and the City of Galveston, as well as others. And so two faculty, Doctors Chris Hauser and Christian Brandstrom from Texas A&M University, were interested in understanding how people on the beach identified rip currents given information that they received on NOAA rip current signs that Texas Sea Grant distributes along the Texas coast every year on behalf of NOAA. And so what they found basically was that the public was going to the beach, and they were actually sitting in front of rip currents, right in front of rip currents, and parents were putting their children into the rip current, because when you sit on the beach and look out at the water, where the rip current hits the beach actually is a very calm looking area of water. And if you look at it from the aerial view, which is how the NOAA rip current sign displays it, you can see where the rip current is from an aerial point of view, but the people who are sitting on the beach are seeing it from the beach view. And so that led the investigators to reach out to NOAA, to reach out to all of their partners, and talk about how they can and should redesign those rip current warning signs on the beach so that they are place-based designs or place-based views that show what people sitting on a beach should be looking for, not what a seagull flying over the beach sees. And so this project had a lot of different outcomes. It increased awareness, it increased learning, it helped people change their behavior. It also is going to have some other kinds of long-term impacts once those new signs are developed, because presumably people will understand them better and be able to make changes and adjustments to their behavior on the beach. So we're real excited about that. So increased awareness, increased knowledge, increased learning, hopefully changes in behavior, practice, and decisions, and hopefully some long-term consequences that will impact the health of Texans, because every year people die from rip currents along the Texas coast as well as along the US coast. So that's just one example of some really great social science research that we funded that has had an impact. Our second example is another great example from doctors Mike Wetz and Chinping Hu from Texas A&M Corpus Christi. They partnered with the Coastal Bend Bays and Estuaries Program and the Baffin Bay Working Group to help the Baffin Bay community identify why fish were sick and dying in Baffin Bay. And what's really cool about this project is that it was the community that identified the problem. Fishing is a huge part of their economy, and when fish were sick and dying, they realized there was a problem with the health of their bay that they needed researchers to address. So they actually went to Texas A&M Corpus Christi, found the faculty to help them begin the research. We jumped in and funded different parts of the research, as did many other state agencies and sponsors, and together have identified the sources of organic matter that are coming from land-based sources and contributing to hypoxia formation in Baffin Bay. And so what's really, really cool about this project is the researchers understood outcome-oriented research, and they didn't just stop after they identified the sources of organic matter, publish the paper, and then move on to their next grant proposal. They became involved in the Baffin Bay Working Group. In fact, they've been leading the Baffin Bay Working Group through a number of exercises and have now gotten to the point where they are working on developing a watershed protection plan for Baffin Bay. They've pulled in state agencies, federal agencies, non-governmental organizations, lots of land users in that area, the local communities. It really is one of the best projects I think the Texas Sea Grant has ever funded in terms of where it began and where it has gone and where it's going to go. So they have gone above and beyond the call of duty in terms of generating outcomes with their research. They have provided learning, awareness, knowledge, skills, and motivation to their local community. There have been medium-term actions, changes in behavior, some changes in practice, some decisions and policy changes as well. And we expect that in the next few years, we're going to see some real significant long-term consequences of this research that are going to have environmental impacts as well as economic and social impacts in Texas for many years to come. And one of the things that I want to point out about this project is that when we received the proposal, our reviewers at the technical review panel stage just could not stop talking about it because it hit all of the dimensions that we were looking for. And here's an example of some of the comments that they provided to us in writing. So if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, reviewer number 1 said, "This is an excellent proposal that will result in tangible benefits where resource managers can use the results from the study to mitigate environmental stressors resulting in hypoxia in South Texas estuaries and bays." These are the type of comments we're looking for from our reviewers that lead us to supporting projects such as this one. And if you look at reviewer number 2, he or she takes it a little bit further, says results from the study will provide answers to continuing environmental problems and enable resource managers to take specific mitigation measures, and also goes on to talk about what this group of researchers plans to do in their outreach plan to disseminate the information and how they were engaging different stakeholder groups to help them with the outcomes of their research. So this is what we want to see from all the reviewers. We want them to read your pre-proposals and full proposals and get just as excited about your research because it does have tangible benefits. It will result in outcomes that are beneficial to Texans, to Texas communities, and it's visible and tangible and desirable. And then finally, the last previously funded project that I wanted to mention today is an example of some technology that was developed that we funded. And this was a project that was led by Sam Brody and colleagues at Texas A&M Galveston a number of years ago. They developed a web-based tool that the public can use to assess impacts in their coastal communities with respect to flooding and other types of coastal hazards. And this is a project that is now being further developed with some NOAA funds from the Office of Coastal Management to make it more accessible, to update it, and to enhance it from the first few versions that were developed. And this is an example where many partners came together to support this one technology. And many people from local communities to state governments to the public are benefiting from this tool that was developed. So, so that's the end of my examples of different things that we have funded. Now, every year people ask me to tell them, you know, what we're looking for. And I hope that we've given you a sense of what we're looking for in terms of this current competition. If you're interested in some other research project examples, I encourage you to check out NOAA Restore Science Programs website that I have linked here. They had a really well done seminar series that was a series of webinars by their funded investigators who were required to do actionable science in the Gulf of Mexico. And I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from the work that they supported, and we'll give you some additional examples of what we mean by bringing science to action. And so I share that with you just as another example of a place you can look to for some other research that is similar to the research we support. So I'm going to end up with this slide, which I began with, and emphasize a few important points. Texas Sea Grant wants to fund research that has obviously intellectual merit as well as broader impacts. We want to support research that's aligned with our strategic plan goals. And I strongly encourage you to take a look at our strategic plan, specifically the 3 focus areas I called out today and the goals underneath those 3 focus areas. We want to support research that addresses one of our research priorities. These are research priorities that were developed after we surveyed the public in Texas about what they believed were research priorities for the next 2 years. These are not research priorities that, you know, we pulled out of a hat. We pulled them out of a public survey. We want to fund integrated research and extension projects, and we leave that to you to decide how you want to integrate research and extension. And we have extension professionals who are able and willing to talk to you about your projects and help you develop your projects, and even be engaged in your projects should you wish for them to be engaged in your project. And I encourage you to reach out to our people. We want to fund outcome-oriented research that spans many areas that include natural, physical, social, behavioral, economic sciences, engineering, policy, planning, and law. And I'm sorry that I've left out policy, planning, and law from this slide. We also want to support research that has an end user identified. And we also want your research to generate some substantial short-term, medium-term, and if possible, long-term impacts in Texas. So that's the end of my presentation today. I will hang on for the rest of the webinar and be present to answer any questions you might have after Mia's presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay. And here we go. So as we have been talking about Texas Sea Grant and how we are funded by NOAA, Texas Sea Grant is a unique partnership that unites the resources of the federal government, NOAA, the state of Texas, and universities across the state for creating knowledge, tools, products, and services that help the coastal communities, marine industries, and the people of Texas. And so, as developed out of the birth of the land grant universities and the research that results from land grant universities, early in the 60s, researchers were wondering about the water and sea and coastal communities. And so Congress passed the state Sea Grant College Program Act, and there are now 33 Sea Grant programs across the country. And the headquarters for the Texas State Sea Grant Program is here at Texas A&M University. And so we are 100% funded by NOAA, where we have partial resources from Texas A&M University. We are a program within the College of Geosciences. And as we are funded by NOAA, our obligation to NOAA is to fund research. Dr. Plotkin had mentioned our administration budget is about 15%, but we fund researchers across the state of Texas with more than 40% of our funds, up to 50% of the funds we receive. We are obligated to fund researchers across the state of Texas, and that builds the really research and the outreach of applying that research to extension and education. So we have the partnership between the federal sources, state sources to provide results for the people of Texas. And we fund researchers across the state of Texas by means of our biennial research competition. And these competitions are in accordance with required NOAA and National Sea Grant guidelines, as well as the gold standard guidelines from the National Science Foundation. So again, Texas Sea Grant supports research that aligns with its strategic plan, because as Dr. Plotkin mentioned, we are evaluated by NOAA on an annual basis on our research investments, the outcomes of the research, and the relevance of those investments and how they're identified to the state needs. So again, as was mentioned, the strategic plan focus areas, the three that we are looking for with this research competition is to focus on the areas of sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, healthy coastal ecosystems, and resilient communities and economies. And so again, we encourage you to, before you develop your pre-proposal, for all applicants to review the Texas Sea Grant Strategic Plan, the focus areas, the goals, actions, and outcomes that we've been addressing. I have it linked here, and all of this information is found on our website. And so for the Texas Sea Grant request for proposals, our merit review process is a two-phase process. We have a pre-proposal phase and then a full proposal phase. All reviews are guided by objective review criteria and by reviewers without a conflict of interest. And so as we look at the two different types of the phases of the merit review process, pre-proposals are reviewed and scored by at least 3 scholars and/or extension specialists without conflict of interest. And full proposals are reviewed and scored by external out-of-state peer reviewers, also then further reviewed and scored and ranked by an external technical review panel. And so these scores and ranks substantially inform Texas Sea Grant's decision to encourage or not encourage a pre-proposal to be developed into a full proposal, and then whether to fund or not fund a full proposal. So we would encourage you, as you're starting to review the strategic plan, the goals, the focus areas with those goals, and then the research priorities for the current RFP. If you have questions related to the funding priorities, please reach out to Dr. Plotkin. All other inquiries on the actual pre-proposal development, your submission, and the review process, or the EC grant proposal system, then please contact me, and I'll be happy to assist where I might be able to answer some of your questions. So before we go into just the basics of submitting your pre-proposal, I wanted to give you an additional note for you to consider, because all full proposals that are recommended for funding have to comply with the National Environmental Protection Agency's requirements. So all NOAA funded research projects must comply with NEPA. You may recall from years previously that there was a multi-page form with multi questions on addressing areas to protect and note where you're doing your research and whether or not permits are needed and that sort of thing. And in the last couple of years or so, there's been developed a questionnaire that is an abbreviated version. So that form, the abbreviated environmental compliance questionnaire, must be completed with inclusion of relevant proper permits, the status of the permits, address that information, or if you've already received those permits, then you would include those copies, enclose them with the questionnaire. And that would include the same sort of information and permits by partner institutions and subrecipients. If you have a collaborator who's at another university collaborating with you on your proposal, those subrecipients would be responsible for that information as well related to their work. But I wanted to let you all know about this because it's important. Again, all full proposals that are recommended for funding, we need to have the form completed, and it's the responsibility for acquiring permits. That responsibility lies with the funded lead PI, and failure to secure permits, which takes time to secure. So failure to secure permits may result in delayed receipt of funds with a special award condition placed on the pending award, which would require satisfying, and it would have to be satisfied prior to the start of the project or prior to that part of the scope of work being started. So as you draft your full proposal, but even be thinking now as you draft your pre-proposal, which will develop into a full proposal by April, consider the timing needs for completing the questionnaire comprehensively, starting to look to securing your permits as necessary, as well as any other institutional compliance office requests for animal welfare and/or human subject protocol approvals. You may visit our website. I've uploaded forms, the abbreviated environmental compliance questionnaire form. There's also a guideline form from NOAA. And we've also provided different examples of types of research that would have had a NEPA form questionnaire completed based on whether it's field studies research project, or lab studies research project, or social science type work questionnaire that would be completed based on that research topic. So those are handy examples that you can review to make sure that you're completing the questions and answers on the form properly. And this will ensure timeliness to have your NEPA form completed accurately with your approvals and documents in order. And please seek advisement from your own institutional compliance office as needed, because you're as a part of your own institution, they'll want you to be compliant with everything that the compliance office would oversee. And so as we move into how to submit your pre-proposal, all pre-proposals must be submitted using the Sea Grant online proposal system in order to be eligible to submit a full proposal. Pre-proposals are due January 15th before 5 o'clock. And I have a link here where you may access the Sea Grant system. And again, all of this is on our webpage for the request for proposals webpage that lists a lot of resources. One thing that is very important, so there's an Sea Grant PI manual that's a basic introduction to Sea Grant and how to register. The Sea Grant system was developed by a company by the name of Exion. All of the Sea Grant notification emails and submission notification confirmations, that sort of thing, all of those emails come from the system with this email address. And we want you to please add that address to your safe contact lists and do that as before you're even registering into the system. And that way, it'll ensure that as you're registering, you'll receive verification emails and other notifications. And of course, when you're submitting your proposal, you'll receive those confirmations. So that way, it's just going to make your life easier and you'll feel better about working with the system. And so the following along exactly from the RFP pre-proposal documentation on what is required for a pre-proposal. I've taken this directly from the RFP. It's a simple one-page PDF narrative. No budget is required. It's in a sense like a letter of intent, but a pre-proposal is required in order to submit a full proposal. So a one-page PDF narrative, 6 items are required as the required elements, the project title, your PI and co-PI names and institutional affiliations. And here we go where Dr. Plotkin went into great detail of what we are needing you to address and to tell us in your pre-proposal one-page document. Tell us what focus area you have selected and what focus area goals you have selected from the Texas Sea Grant Strategic Plan. Based on your project, you may just be focusing on one focus area and one goal, but you don't have to limit yourself and you don't have to select more than one either. So once you've identified for us your focus area and goal that your proposal will be relevant to, then we want you to list the research priority that was listed on the RFP page 2, those research priorities that were listed under each of those focus area goals. And then once you've listed these, then you may go into your project description, similar to an abstract, your objectives, intellectual merit and broader impacts, with clearly identified relationship to the Texas Sea Grant focus area, goals, and research priorities that you've selected, and describe how your research that you're proposing will relate to those focus areas and research priorities and how it will achieve those goals from the strategic plan. And lastly, we want you, and it is required for you to identify an end user, identify and define who would be using through your outcomes of your research, by whom and those outcomes. So again, 6 items: project title, identify PI, co-PI names, institutional affiliations, the focus area goals selected from strategic plan, the research priority identified on page 2 of the RFP, and then your abstract or project description of your objectives, how your research relates and will achieve the goals, and then the end user for your research project. And then in general, most RFPs have formatting requirements, and ours does as well. And again, I've taken this exactly from the RFP. Text must be single spaced, a minimum of a 12-point font, 1-inch margins. Again, the pre-proposal is just a one-page PDF. The content must be written in the third person, informative to those working in the same or related disciplines, and understandable to a scientific literate audience. Do not include page numbers, headers, or footers, or exceed 1 page. So this is just a very, very simple document for your preparation for this pre-proposal. The number of pre-proposals that may be submitted by a lead investigator, you may submit no more than 2 pre-proposals as lead PI and or as a co-PI. And then of note, successful investigators will receive a maximum of just 1 grant as a lead PI. So again, you may submit more than 2 pre-proposals as a PI, or a pre-proposal as a PI, and then another one as a co-PI. But again, the award itself will only have 1 grant as a lead PI. And then life after the pre-proposal submission, all of the pre-proposals will undergo an administrative review by me, looking at the requirements that I've just gone over, the 6 items that we want you to identify in your pre-proposal document, and whether or not the relevance has been identified for your goals and focus areas and research priorities and your end users. I'll be looking at formatting as well. Again, don't exceed more than 1 page. Pre-proposals then will undergo a technical review scored by at least 3 scholars or extension specialists without conflict of interest. All of the pre-proposals will then be encouraged or not encouraged for development into a full proposal, and we will notify you and provide blinded reviews by February 15th. So the pre-proposal submission is due at 5 o'clock on January 15th, and we'll conduct the reviews and have results notified back to you by February 15th. And then the following week, we're looking to schedule a full proposal workshop for you. And our request for proposal webpage has our full proposal workshop that we had for our last competition, which is still good for you to maybe look at for integrating your research with extension and how to package a competitive full proposal. But we will have a whole new workshop this year on February 23rd, a day-long workshop on how to prepare the full proposal, how to use the Sea Grant system for the full proposal. And then we will look at connecting you with our extension, Texas Sea Grant extension specialists and agents across the state, and allow you to start conversations with them. If you look on our webpage under our people and profiles, you can review our extension staff there in a little specialty of where they're located and how they can be contacted. And then full proposals are due April 16th. So you have quite a while from the end of February until mid-April to submit your full proposal. I'll also be encouraging you with the pre-proposal, no budget is required. Of course, the full proposal will have a full budget, and you would want to be sure to have your institutions approve your budget ahead of time, and then submit your other documents as the full proposal by April 16th. So allow your sponsored programs office time, and I'll go into that more so during that workshop, but just keep that in mind. But you don't need to worry about a budget for the pre-proposal at this point. And so the EC grant system for submitting pre-proposals, I'm going to jump ahead for a moment here. As you log in to register, this is a screenshot of the EC grant system. Again, this presentation will be uploaded to our webpage so you can download the PDF. But I just wanted to show that to you quickly where you register. That's the landing page. And then simply navigating the system steps you through every process where you start here and start a proposal, where you next upload the one-page narrative, and then a submission preview where you're able to preview what you will submit, which can be submitted multiple times up until the deadline. So it's a friendly user system in that regard, and it will be very easy for you. But I wanted to show you that as an overview before I give you the steps of how to submit your pre-proposal in EC grant. Taken from page 4 of the RFP. And one thing to note is that it works best with the Firefox and Chrome browser. And first steps regarding EC grant, download that PI manual from the EC grant software developer. Gives you that overview of logging into the system. Again, this is the website to our webpage there that has the link and download for the manual. Again, add the EC grant contact email address to your saved contact lists to ensure that you receive all notifications and submission confirmations to avoid routing to the junk mail folder. So more likely than not, if you've not submitted a proposal before, if you have, then you can just simply log in. If you have not, you'll need to register an account, and the default is you'll be registering an investigator account. And it will step you through the process. Once you register, you'll be sent a verification email with a code that you can enter to complete the next steps of the registration process. So again, adding this email address to your saved contacts list, then you will find the email without having to go look at your junk mail folder. So just, again, keep that in mind just to make your life easier. And then once you're in EC grant, the current tasks tab that you would go to will be the RFP for you to click on and to start your pre-proposal. And once I have opened up the EC grant system for this RFP 2022-2024, I'll have it open when we return from winter break on Monday, January 4th. So once you register, you won't see a task yet until, and so you can register anytime, but you just won't see this RFP task until January 4th. And so simply it's just a really quick add a proposal, and you type in your title of the proposal and click on continue. Confirm that your proposal title loaded correctly. Skip all the other fields on the page and then just simply click next. Then you may select add narrative. Retype your proposal title. That's just the way the system goes on that. But so where you add your narrative, you retype your proposal title, upload your one-page PDF of your pre-proposal narrative, choose save, click next, go to submission preview to review your document prior to submission. You may also download it in a PDF for your review. And you can make edits at any time before the deadline, but you must select submit before 5 o'clock on January 15th. The system will automatically close at that time. And you can submit your proposal as often as you want. You can, do a test submission if you'd like, and then your final version. Just delete your prior version, upload your final version, and you can submit as often as you want prior to January 15th at 5 o'clock. But remember to select resubmit. If you do revise your pre-proposal, be sure you click on resubmit so that the EC grant system will record your change. And so the landing page where you would register your account, and it'll step you through the entering your verification. You'll get typical, similar to other registrations where I am not a robot, and you go through that little coding process. So it's similar to any other item or system that you're registering in. And so again, where you start off in the pre-proposal system, you start here by entering your title. So welcome. I'm adding the title of my proposal here. I can add keywords if I'd like to, the start and ending date. And then you can either, if you need to change it, you can either update or just simply click next. And then where you would be, see, there's just 3 steps here. So starting here was adding the title. Where you hit next, it hits you at the narrative page. Simply upload your document here. After you've typed in your title again, upload your document here, save it, click next, and go to your submission preview. And this is kind of a cover page on how your pre-proposal would look like. And you can download this page. Downloading this page is just this page. If you download the proposal.zip, you'll receive this entire page with the link of your document. And then it will also have a separate document, which is that pre-proposal PDF. So it's helpful where it just gives you everything. And then when you're ready to submit, just click on the submit button. And it's just very simple there. And so to kind of give you an example of a 1-page pre-proposal narrative that contains all 6 required elements for this RFP competition. So the 6 elements here that I was required to include for my pre-proposal narrative, I have my title, Mary Had a Little Lamb, my PI, my name and institutional affiliation here. The focus area I've chosen is the focus area from the strategic plan of resilient communities and economies. I looked at the goals and how my research relates would be to achieve goal 1, coastal communities and industries increase their resilience to natural and man-made hazards to mitigate economic disruption. So I've selected the focus area and the goal from that focus area. I then define which research priority that is listed under resilient communities economies. I list that specific research priority that my pre-proposal will address. And for my Mary Had a Little Lamb pre-proposal, I'm going to choose the research priority of social vulnerability. And then my project description, and then the end user. So the project description, your abstract, my project is described by including sheep herding techniques to sustain coastal sheep community. I address the intellectual merits, how herding techniques will focus on why that technique of herding is best practice. My expected broader impacts for extension, education, and outreach is expected to include classes in herding to ranchers, herding, and more herding. They're my keywords. And then most importantly, how the relationship to the chosen Texas Sea Grant focus area and goal and research priorities, you want to define that relationship here so that the reviewer will know why you've chosen these and how you're going to achieve that result. So for me, sheep herding fits directly with the focus area of resilient communities and economies that I have up here, and to the research priority that I've chosen of social vulnerability. The project will achieve the focused area goal and research priority as ranchers learn the importance of herding to mitigate coastal social vulnerability. And then my end users that I'm going to list for my pre-proposal is the Sheep Herding Ranchers Association. They will benefit directly as an end user and stakeholder as herding techniques improve and solve coastal social vulnerability. So again, the 6 items, what you're going to do, how and why you will do it, and the results and outcomes, and who will be using those outcomes. And this is an example of your confirmation email on the proposal that was submitted. The system will automatically pull your name from the people record, your title from the pre-proposal that you submitted in regards to which RFP is in the system. It'll remind you, you can make changes up until that deadline, and just helpful information. But again, adding this email address, then you'll be receiving your notifications and your confirmation emails in your inbox rather than your junk mail folder. Institutions have, they've instituted such high levels of firewall and security protocol, which is good. But so identifying and whitelisting this email address will make sure that your all of the emails from the Sea Grant system will be identified as safe and will go to your inbox. And I talk about this over and over because there have been issues in the past. And so we're just trying to guide you all and make your life easier. And so we are here at the question and answer session. So you can, that's open to everyone. Let's see. I'll open up the chat, but really if you could just start typing your questions, that would be good too. I will look at the participants. I think when we did this previously to see if any of the participants raised their hand to ask a question and then you could begin typing, I did not see anyone raising their hand for us to either talk, or I think because of you all being attendees rather than participants in a meeting, this, as you all are attendees in a webinar, then just typing in your questions, I think is going to be the most efficient thing at this point. So we'll just let you formulate your questions and begin typing. And we'll just give you some time there. Again, we will have the video and our PowerPoint presentations uploaded to our webpage. If you have a specific funding priority question, address that to Dr. Plotkin, and then you can, all the other proposal and Sea Grant submission questions can come to me. So I have a first question. I was having some connectivity issues. Did you mention? No, I did not address the cost share, and that's a good question because right now we're not looking at including a budget on your pre-proposal. It's just a one-page narrative. But looking ahead for your full proposal, NOAA has all the federal funding that goes to each of the state Sea Grant programs. One of their requirements is 50% cost sharing. So for every $2 that NOAA funds us, we have to report $1 of cost share. And that same requirement, because the research that we fund to you is federally flowed through from our omnibus. So we pass those same rules and regs and requirements on to the researchers. So yes, on the cost share, you would have whatever your federal requested funds will be from Texas Sea Grant, then you would want to have at minimum per year a 50% cost share budget. And we need to have you all focus on having the cost share budget equal at minimum 50% of your Fed funds budget per year, not higher one year and lower the next year. It has to be per year. The most easily trackable and reportable type of cost share that we recommend, because cost share is as you propose and submit your proposal, you are contractually obligating your institution when you submit your proposal. And as you're funded and as you work your scope of work and spend your funds, you have to report that 50% portion of cost share. So the easily trackable type of cost share would be payroll, tuition, and other sources like third-party cost share may be appropriate, but you really have to document that well, the value, and we don't encourage that. It's more of your institution would have those same requirements on having reportable, trackable cost share from, for example, the payroll system or tuition, which is built into that. I'd give an example, which is it doesn't seem like it's a serious matter, but it truly is. So if I've decided I'm going to submit a proposal to farm the South 40, and I've put up my family's tractor as the value for a portion of my cost share, once I get funded, if that tractor breaks down or my neighbor down the street stole it and I don't have that asset to offer as cost share, the sponsor can pull your funds. So that's just a very obvious extreme example of the type of cost share you would not want to have on your proposal budget. And I'll wait and let you all type any more questions that you might have. And as we're getting closer, well, we have 25 minutes, but again, we'll have everything uploaded to our website for you to review, and you are more than welcome to email us as well. But we'll wait a few more minutes to see if there are any other questions that will come in typed. We thank you for attending. This has been a great full attendee list. So another question related to cost share. So it's 50% of your total Fed funds requested budget. So if you can envision a budget with two columns, you have your Fed funds requested budget, that total, and the other column is your cost share budget, should be 50% of your total budget. So it's of the federal budget, of the federal ask. You're welcome. This is so interesting. You feel like you're talking to a field that we can't really see. So thank you, though, for sticking with your question and asking further to get an understanding. Thank you all again for participating. We appreciate your interest. And we'll just continue here for a few more minutes and see if there are any other questions. Okay. Well, I don't see anyone madly typing away. So at this point, I'm going to, I think, end the session. But as you think a little further down the line, or even maybe over the holidays, just email Dr. Plotkin for funding priority type questions and email me for everything else. Making it easier for your pre-proposal submission. So thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. Have a great winter break. And we will end our session.